All right, so we're diving into something I know a lot of you have been asking about: quality improvement in healthcare. But not just the theory, like how do we actually put it into practice? So we're going deep with chapter 1 of this handbook on leading QI projects. And it's basically like a toolkit for becoming a change agent. And get this, they open with this fascinating example about how hospitals communicate with patients who are in isolation rooms. Intrigued? Me too.
It is a really great illustration
Yeah.
of how QI can be applied to what seem like simple things, but can actually have a surprisingly large impact.
Okay, so before we get to the isolation rooms, let's start with the basics. What exactly is quality improvement? It's one of those buzzwords that gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah. The handbook defines it as making a process or system better, which sounds pretty straightforward. But what's really interesting is how they emphasize that QI isn't just a healthcare thing. It's a way of thinking that can be applied to any system that you want to make more effective.
So it's like a universal toolkit for making things better. I like that. But they also get real about the challenges, right? It's not always easy
Yeah.
to make those improvements stick, especially in complex systems.
Absolutely. They acknowledge how difficult it can be to make sure that solutions work system-wide, not just in these isolated pockets. And they get that getting everyone on board
Yeah.
and tracking those small changes, proving their value. It can be a real uphill battle. I mean, you've probably encountered some of these hurdles yourself.
Oh, for sure. But here's what I found really encouraging. The handbook emphasizes that QI is ultimately about adding value to the community. That really resonated with me.
Yeah, it's a crucial shift in perspective. It moves us beyond just fixing problems within a specific department or team and towards a broader vision of how our work impacts the entire healthcare ecosystem and the people that we serve.
Okay, so we've got a handle on what QI is, but why does it matter so much, particularly in healthcare? I mean, I think everyone wants the best healthcare possible for themselves and their loved ones, right?
Absolutely. We all have a stake in a healthcare system that delivers high-quality care. And the handbook brings in this framework from the Institute of Medicine, the IOM 6 dimensions of healthcare quality. They call it STEEP: safe, timely, effective, efficient, equitable, and patient-centered.
I remember learning about STEEP in school. It's a good framework, but honestly, sometimes those acronyms feel a bit abstract. How does this actually play out in real life?
Well, think back to that isolation room example. It perfectly highlights how even the best intentions can fall short if we don't consider all 6 dimensions. Maybe isolating a patient is effective at preventing the spread of infection, but if it's not done in a way that's safe, timely, equitable, and patient-centered, it can actually do more harm than good.
Okay. I'm starting to see how those seemingly simple situations can get complicated fast. So QI is about making sure we're not just doing things right, but also doing the right things right and doing them in a way that considers the whole picture.
Exactly. And that's where the handbook gets really practical. They acknowledge that feeling of, I want to make things better, but I don't even know where to start. And they provide a roadmap for anyone who wants to become a change agent, regardless of their role.
And that's what I love about this handbook. It's not just for people with fancy titles or specialized training. They make it clear that leadership and QI skills are available to everyone. They even break down the process into specific steps, like finding the right topic, setting aims, and using these things called PDSA cycles.
Which are essentially a structured way of testing changes. In a controlled way, they allow you to experiment on a small scale, learn from your successes and failures, and then refine your approach before rolling it out more widely.
That makes a lot of sense. It feels a lot less daunting than trying to change everything at once. So
Yeah.
we've covered the what and the why of QI, but how about we dig into those practical steps and see how this all comes together? Let's start with that isolation room example, shall we? It sounds like a simple problem, but I bet there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
You're absolutely right. There's a whole story behind that example, and it highlights some key principles of QI that we can all learn from.
All right. I'm hooked. Let's unpack this isolation room conundrum and see what QI insights we can glean from it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into quality improvement. Remember that isolation room example we were talking about? It turns out the author of this handbook actually experienced this firsthand as a patient.
Oh, wow. So they weren't just theorizing about QI. They are living it. That's pretty cool. What happened?
So they found themselves in isolation for a suspected infection. And medically, everything was fine. The precautions were necessary. But the way it was communicated, that's where things fell apart. They felt isolated, anxious, even a bit dehumanized.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Being stuck in a room with limited contact can be really tough psychologically, even if you understand the medical reason.
Exactly. And that's what sparked their QI journey. They realized that the process of isolation, the way it was communicated and implemented, was failing to consider the patient experience, even though the clinical care was sound.
So their personal experience became the catalyst for a QI project. That's a great example of how anyone can become a change agent just by paying attention to what's happening around them.
Absolutely. And they use this experience to illustrate the importance of those 6 dimensions of healthcare quality we discussed. STEEP, for example. Safety isn't just about preventing medical errors. It's also about psychological safety.
And patient-centered care
Yeah,
means considering the whole person, not just their illness.
exactly. So
Oh.
let's say we're inspired by this story and we want to apply QI to improve communication during isolation in our own hospital. Where do we even start?
Well, the handbook says the first step is to identify a topic, but it sounds like we've already done that. Communication during isolation?
Right. But we need to get more specific. So instead of trying to tackle everything
Yeah.
about isolation communication, it's more effective to narrow our focus. We could look at how information about isolation precautions is explained to patients, or how we can better support their emotional well-being while they're in isolation.
Okay. So it's like zooming in on a particular aspect of the problem. And then once we have our specific topic, the handbook says we need to gather baseline data. What does that look like in this case?
It means understanding the current state of things. So we could survey patients about their experiences, interview staff, review existing policies and procedures. This would give us a clear picture of what's working, what's not, and where the biggest opportunities for improvement lie.
And this data helps us set our aims, right? Those SMART goals we talked about earlier, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So instead of just saying, we want to make communication better, we'd have something
We
like,
want to increase patient satisfaction
Yeah.
with communication about isolation precautions by 20% within 6 months of implementing a new protocol.
yeah, that's a smart aim. I can see how having that clear target helps focus your efforts and measure your progress. Okay, so we've got our topic, we've got our data, we've set our aims. It's time to actually do something, right?
Exactly. And this is where those PDSA cycles we mentioned come in. Remember, plan, do, study, act, instead of trying to overhaul the entire isolation communication process at once. We start small, test our ideas, learn from the results, and then refine our approach.
It's like that saying, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. You don't have to have the perfect solution right away. You just need to start somewhere and keep iterating.
Precisely. So in our isolation example, we might start by piloting a new communication protocol on a single unit. Maybe we create a brochure explaining isolation precautions in plain language. Or we train nurses to use a specific script when talking to patients about isolation.
Okay, so that's the do part. We're putting our plan into action in a controlled environment. Then comes the study phase, right? How do we know if our pilot is actually working?
We gather data, of course. We could use those patient satisfaction surveys we mentioned earlier, or we could track the number of complaints related to isolation communication. We might even interview patients and staff to get their feedback on the new protocol.
And the act phase is all about using that data to make adjustments. If the pilot is successful, we expand it. If not, we tweak our approach and try again.
Exactly. The PDSA cycle is all about continuous learning and improvement. And here's a key insight from the handbook. Even if your initial attempts don't yield the results you were hoping for, don't get discouraged. Those failures are actually valuable learning opportunities.
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that QI is about getting everything right the first time. But the reality is, it's about embracing those setbacks and using them to refine your approach.
Absolutely. And the handbook shares this great anecdote about a team that was trying to reduce wait times in the emergency department. And their first few PDSA cycles actually made things worse. But they kept iterating, gathering data, and making adjustments. And eventually, they achieved significant improvements.
That's inspiring. It shows that persistence pays off, even when you hit roadblocks along the way.
Okay, so we've talked about identifying a topic, gathering data, setting aims, and using PDSA cycles. What comes next in our QI journey? Well, as our PDSA cycles progress and we start to see positive results, we need to think about how to sustain those improvements. How do we make these changes a permanent part of the system rather than just a temporary fix?
That's a great point. It's one thing to have a successful pilot project, but how do you ensure that those improvements are embedded in the organization's culture and practices?
That's where things like standardization, training,
Huh.
and ongoing monitoring come in. Once we've identified a solution that works, we need to document the process, train staff on the new protocol, and put systems in place to track progress and identify any potential issues.
So it's not just about fixing a problem, it's about creating a system where that problem is less likely to occur in the first place. And that requires a shift in mindset, right? It's about creating a culture of continuous improvement.
Exactly. And that's where leadership plays a crucial role.
Ah, yes. Leadership, we can't forget about that. I'm guessing the handbook has something to say about the role of leadership in QI. Because even with the best tools and techniques, QI efforts won't succeed without strong leadership, right?
You're absolutely right. And they dedicate a significant section to exploring what effective QI leadership looks like. They argue that it's not just about having a fancy title or giving orders. It's about fostering a culture of trust, transparency, and empowerment.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into this leadership piece. What are some of the key qualities of a good QI leader? What makes them stand out from the crowd?
Well, first and foremost, they create a safe space for people to speak up and share their ideas. Even if those ideas challenge the status quo, they actively solicit feedback, listen attentively, and value diverse perspectives.
It's like they're saying, we're all in this together. Your voice matters, your ideas matter, and we need everyone to contribute if we're going to succeed.
Exactly. And good QI leaders walk the talk. They're not just telling people about the importance of QI. They're demonstrating their commitment. Through their own actions and behaviors, they're constantly seeking ways to improve. They're open to feedback. And they're willing to admit when they've made a mistake.
So it's about leading by example, inspiring others to embrace the QI mindset through their own enthusiasm and dedication.
Precisely. And they understand that QI is not a one-time project. It's an ongoing journey. They create systems and structures that support continuous improvement. They provide ongoing training and resources, and they celebrate successes along the way, recognizing the hard work and contributions of their team.
That makes sense. It's about building that momentum, keeping people engaged and motivated to keep striving for better.
Absolutely. And here's a crucial insight from the handbook. They emphasize that leadership isn't just about position or title. Anyone can be a leader in QI, regardless of their role. It's about taking initiative, advocating for change, and empowering others to make a difference.
That's a powerful message. It's a reminder that we all have the potential to be change agents, to make a positive impact on our organizations and the people we serve.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial element of QI, communication.
Ah, yes. Communication. The glue that holds everything together. I have a feeling this is going to be a big topic, so why don't we save it for Part 3 of our deep dive. We'll explore how effective communication can make or break a QI initiative and delve into some practical strategies for communicating clearly and persuasively.
Sounds like a plan. See you there.
Welcome back to our deep dive into quality improvement. We've covered what QI is, why it matters, and even touched on the importance of leadership. But, like we teased at the end of Part 2, there's another crucial element we need to explore: communication.
Yeah, you can't underestimate the role of communication QI. It's not just about sharing information. It's about building relationships, creating buy-in, and ultimately driving lasting change.
Right, and our trusty handbook emphasizes this point, stating that effective communication is essential at every stage of the QI process. They even go so far as to say it's the lifeblood of any successful QI initiative.
And think about it. You could have the most brilliant idea for improving patient care, but if you can't communicate it effectively to your team, to leadership, to the people who are actually going to be implementing it, well, just going to stay an idea.
Yeah, it's like that saying, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. If you make a change, but don't communicate it effectively, did it really happen?
Exactly. So where do we start? Well, the handbook suggests thinking about communication right from the beginning, even during that initial problem identification phase.
Okay, so let's go back to our isolation room example. We've identified communication as a problem area, but how do we articulate that problem in a way that resonates with everyone?
First, we need to be crystal clear about what a problem is and why it matters. So instead of just saying communication is bad, we need to paint a picture of the impact it's having on patients, staff, and even the organization as a whole. Remember the author's experience? They felt isolated, anxious, dehumanized.
Right, and those feelings can lead to negative consequences like decreased patient satisfaction, longer hospital stays, or even medical complications.
Exactly. So when we're communicating about the problem, we need to highlight those consequences, make it real for people, connect it to their values, and show them why it's in everyone's best interest to address this issue.
And we need to tailor our message to different audiences too, right?
Yeah.
What resonates with frontline nurse
Yeah,
might not resonate with a hospital administrator.
absolutely. When we're talking to nurses, we might focus on the impact of poor communication, on their workload, and their job satisfaction. When we're talking to administrators, we might emphasize the financial implications of negative patient experiences, like decreased reimbursements or lower HTA-HPS scores.
So it's not just about what we say, it's about how we say it and who we're saying it to.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this targeted communication approach continues throughout the QI process. As we move into the planning and implementation phases, it's crucial to keep everyone informed about progress, challenges, any changes to the plan.
And this is where things can get tricky, right? Because QI often involves a lot of trial and error. We're testing things out, making adjustments, and sometimes things don't go as planned. How do we communicate about those setbacks without discouraging people or making them lose faith in the process?
Transparency is key. The handbook stresses the importance of being honest about the challenges we face. If a PDSA cycle doesn't yield the results we were hoping for, we acknowledge that, but we frame it as a learning opportunity.
So instead of saying, well, that didn't work, we say something like,
We learned that this approach wasn't as effective as we thought it would be, but that's okay. We gathered valuable data, we identified some areas for improvement, and we're already working on a revised plan.
yeah, that's a much more positive and constructive way to frame it. It keeps people engaged and focused on solutions rather than dwelling on the setbacks. And on the flip side, when things are going well, it's important to celebrate those successes, right?
Absolutely. Sharing those wins, big or small, helps build momentum and reinforce the value of QI. It shows people that their efforts are making a difference, and it inspires them to keep going.
It's like those gold stars we used to get in elementary school. A little recognition can go a long way.
Exactly. And then finally, as we move into that sustainability phase, communication plays a vital role in ensuring that those improvements become embedded in this system. It's not enough to just implement a change. We need to make sure it sticks.
So it's not just about communicating during the project, it's about communicating after the project is officially over.
Right. We need to document processes, develop training materials, and create a culture where continuous improvement is everyone's responsibility, and that requires ongoing communication, regular updates, and opportunities for feedback.
Okay, so we've talked about the why of communication in QI. Now, let's get practical. What are some specific strategies for effective communication? The handbook offers some helpful tips, right?
Yes, they highlight using a variety of communication channels. So don't just rely on email or memos. Think about face-to-face meetings, huddles, posters, newsletters, town halls, even social media. The key is to meet people where they are and use the methods that are most effective for them.
And they also talk about the importance of active listening, which goes beyond just hearing what someone is saying. It's about really trying to understand their perspective, their concerns, their ideas.
Right. It's about asking clarifying questions, paraphrasing to make sure you've understood correctly,
Yeah.
and reflecting back the emotions you're hearing.
And being open to feedback, even if it's not what you want here.
Exactly. And then finally, the handbook emphasizes the importance of clear, concise language, avoid jargon, be direct, and use visuals whenever possible to help people grasp complex information.
So it's about making communication accessible and engaging. We want people to understand and be excited about the work we're doing.
Absolutely. And when we do all of this, when we communicate effectively, we create a foundation for collaboration, trust, and ultimately, sustainable improvement.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into quality improvement, what are some key takeaways you hope our listener will remember?
First, remember that QI is a journey, not a destination. It's an ongoing process of learning, adapting, and striving for better. And it's not just for people. With fancy titles or specialized training, anyone can be a change agent. Anyone can make a difference.
And remember that communication is key. Be clear, be concise, be engaging, and most importantly, listen.
And finally, remember that QI is about more than just fixing problems or meeting metrics. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels valued, empowered, and inspired to make a positive impact.
Well said. So to our listener, as you embark on your own QI journey, remember you have the power to make a difference. Embrace the principles of QI. Communicate effectively, and never stop striving for better.
And if you find yourself facing challenges, don't get discouraged. Remember that even setbacks can be valuable learning opportunities.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into quality improvement. We hope you found it informative.